Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created Phaser 3. Previously, we worked on enhancing our battle scene, and we added in logic for when a player gets knocked out. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links to the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as the complete source code for this video. There'll also be links to previous videos if you'd like to catch up, so let's get started. So now that we've wrapped up our battle scene part 2 section, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on our audio in our game. And so we'll be adding in support for loading in audio files and then playing those files at various points in our game. And so this is going to include like background music for like our title scene, our world scene, and battle scene. It's also going to include playing like sound effects. So like when our monsters attack, we'll play an attack sound for each of the various attacks. We'll also add in support for other sound effects, like if our player's walking around the map in our grass, we'll have a background noise for that as well. And so we will lay the groundwork so we can easily extend this in the future with more sound effects and more audio options. And lastly, we're going to go ahead and connect our sound settings that we have in our game to our global sound manager and phaser. And so that way we can control the overall sound in our game and we can disable it based on our settings. All right, so to get started, the first thing we need to do is we actually need to go ahead and load our assets in that we'll be using for our game. And so in the description of this video, there's going to be a link to this direct download for this audio assets zip folder. And this zip folder can also be found on the GitHub repository under the game assets release. And so inside this folder, there's going to be a folder called audio. And under there, there's going to be two subfolders from two different artists that provided some audio assets we'll be using in our game. The first one is Leopaz. They're going to be the sound effects we'll be using in our game. So these will be our battle sound effects as well as the ones we'll be using in our world scene. And then XDev has the audio assets we'll be using for our background audio music. And so just to give a shout out, you can find XDev or Marlon Silva here on SoundCloud. This is where we got the assets for the background music. And Leopaz is over on itch.io. Provided this nice asset pack for this RPG battle sound effects. And so if you can go ahead and download that zip folder and extract it, what we'll want to do is we'll place that whole audio folder into our game under our assets folder, and we'll place it under audio. And so once you do that, you should have this following structure: assets audio, Leopaz with our various sound effects, and then XDev with our various background audio files. All right, so now that we have our assets in our game, we can go ahead and start actually adding our code. And so what we'll need to do is, like our other assets, we'll need to go ahead and load these into our preload scene. So to go ahead and get started, let's jump over to our asset keys file, and we're going to add a new object for our audio assets. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this last object here. We'll go ahead and paste it, and we're going to go ahead and just change this to audio asset keys. And then what we'll do is we're just going to add in title. We'll go ahead and add in battle. And we'll have main. And so these are going to be our keys for our audio objects for our background music, and these are just referencing to our various scenes. So main will be our world scene, and then title will be title, battle will be battle scene. And now we're going to go ahead and do our sound effects. So we'll have a sound effect for when we want to flee. We're going to have one for when we walk in grass. Then we'll have one called claw. And so this will when we do our slash attack. And then finally we'll have one for our ice shard attack, as we'll have ice. So now that we have our asset keys, let's jump over to our preload scene, and we can go ahead and reference these when we load in our assets. So what we'll do is we'll come down below where we load in our UI components for our inventory. We're just going to go ahead and load our audio. And so for our audio, what we're going to do is we're going to do this.load, and we're going to do set path. And we'll come back to this in 1 second, but what we're going to do is we're going to set this to assets, audio, and then we're going to go ahead and set this to our XDev folder. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over here. I'm just going to copy this file name, and we'll go ahead and paste that. All right, so then what we'll do is let's go ahead and load in one of our audio files. We'll do this.load, and we'll do audio. And then we just need to provide our key. And so we'll do our audio asset keys, and we will go ahead and do main first. And then so now we just need to provide our file name. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to here, and I'm just going to copy our file names. And so we'll just do rename, copy that, and we'll go ahead and paste that in. All right, so what we did here is we use this new method called setPath. And what this does is this allows us to tell our file manager where all of the following files will be loaded from. And this will be like the base path. And so previously when we loaded in our assets, what we were doing for each asset is we were manually specifying this asset path, and then we were concatenating on where our file actually lived. And by using set path, Phaser is going to automatically add this to any of the strings that we provide here. And so if we had another subfolder like test, and then this is where our file was located, what Phaser is going to do is when it loads its asset, it's actually going to load it like this. And so it's going to have our prefix with the string we provide here. And so this is just a really nice method if you're pulling a bunch of files from one location. And so like with our audio files, we're going to go ahead and load these by each of our groups here. And so now we just do this and we can provide our file name. And so this is just another way of how we can load in files without having to manually explicate the full path each time. All right, so now we've done that. Let's go ahead and copy that line of code. We're going to go ahead and paste it a few more times, and then we're going to go ahead and grab a reference to each of those so we can go ahead and update them here. And so what we'll do is I'm just going to do rename. We'll go ahead and copy. We'll go ahead and do our decisive battle. Go ahead and paste that. And then we'll have our title theme, WAV. All right, and then we just need to update our references. And so this will go ahead and be our battle. And then we'll go ahead and have our title. All right, so now we just need to load in our assets for our other folder. And so I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. We'll go ahead and paste it. And then what we need to do is we just need to update our folder path. And so it's going to be Leopaz. And now we just need to go ahead and load in our assets. So I'm just going to copy this, go ahead and paste it. And then we have 4 assets. I'm just going to copy and do one more. All right, so we're going to go ahead and have our claw. Let's do our grass. And then we'll have our ice. And then we'll have flee. And then what we need to do is we just need to update our relevant file names to go ahead and match what's over here. So now that we loaded in all of our audio assets we're going to need for our game for the time being, we're going to go ahead and start working on adding these to our game. And so to get started, we're going to jump over to our title scene. And what we're going to do is after our scene starts, we're going to go ahead and do our create method, and we'll set everything up we need for our scene. Once we do all that, at the bottom, this is where we'll go ahead and tell our sound manager to go ahead and start playing our audio for our background music. And so to do this, we just need to go ahead and reference our scene, and then reference sound to reference our sound manager. And then from there, we just call the play method. And so what this method does, it allows us to provide the asset key for the audio file that we like to play. And so this is going to be our audio asset keys, and this will be our title scene. So then you have the option to provide additional sound configurations for this sound object that'll be playing in your scene. And so some of these will allow you to loop the audio object. So like if it's background music, we'll want to go ahead and set this to true because it's false by default. You can also do things like set the overall volume, so a volume between 0 and 1. So if some of your audio files are louder than others, this is how you can modify each one individually. For the time being, we're not going to modify this, and then later on, we're going to go ahead and update the overall sound manager instance to use our settings that we have. But there are a variety of configuration options you can provide here. All right, so if you go ahead and save and refresh, you should be able to go ahead and hear your background music playing in your scene. And so one thing to note is you have to interact with your web page for the audio context to be able to play to your browser. And so if you navigate away, the audio will stop. And so this is just default settings for the browser. And so if you try navigating to like our options scene, what we should see is that our audio object will keep playing in our background. And so one thing to know is with Phaser, you have one global sound manager by default. And when you play an audio game object, it's going to go ahead and keep playing that object until you destroy it. And so this is really nice if you want to keep your game simple and just have one audio object playing across the whole game. However, what can happen is if we don't handle this properly and we go back to our title scene, what we're going to see is our code right now doesn't check to see if we've already added an instance. And now we're going to hear another loop of our background music start to play. And so if you do this a few times, then you'll really notice it in the audio that now we're playing multiple instances of our background music. And this isn't what we want. Instead, what we'd want to do is we just want our one background title, background music to play until we start our game by either clicking new game or continue so we go to our world scene. Once we do that, we'd want to stop our current instance of our background music and go ahead and spin up a new one with our new audio file. Likewise, if we go to our options scene and we go ahead and come back to our title scene, we would want to keep our title music just playing and not actually restart it or create another instance of it. And so we'll have to add some additional logic to make this happen. And so go ahead and do this. We're going to go ahead and make a new utility file to place all of this code. And then that way we don't need to do this in each of our various phaser scenes. Instead, we'll have one abstract method that'll go ahead and do all this for us. And so what we'll do is we'll come into our source folder. Under our utils subfolder, let's go ahead and make a new file. And we're just going to call this audio utils .js. And so inside here, we're going to make a new function. And so we'll export function, and we're going to call this play background music. And so for this function, we'll need two parameters. The first one's going to be our phaser scene. And so from our scene, we'll be able to go ahead and grab our sound manager, and we'll be able to reference if there's any audio already playing. And then we're going to need the audio key of the file that we want to play. And so this will be our audio asset key. And so real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add over our types real quick for our JS doc types. And so basically our scene will be our phaser with scene, and then our audio key is going to be a string. All right, and so in our function, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our data manager, and we're going to see if our sound option is actually on. And if it's not on, then we're going to go ahead and just return early and not play any music. And so this will be the first step of us connecting our audio to our actual in-game settings. And so we'll do if our data manager will reference the store. We'll use our get method, and we'll do our data manager store keys. And we want to go ahead and grab our options for sound. And so if our sound option does not equal sound options.on, we want to go ahead and just return early and not do anything. If our sound is on, now what we need to do is we need to grab a reference to all of the sounds that are actually playing. And so what we'll do const, we're going to do existing sounds. We'll set that equal to our scene, our sound manager, and what we can do is we use the get all playing method. And what this method is going to do is going to return all sounds from our sound manager that are currently playing. And so I'm going to do a console log real quick. We're going to do existing sounds. So then what we're going to do is back in our title scene, instead of manually calling this logic here, let's copy that. Let's come back to our audio utils. We're just going to paste that in there for the time being. And we're going to go ahead and change this to be audio key. And then what we'll do is back in our title scene, let's go and replace that code with a call to our play background music. Let's import in our new function. We'll pass in this for our scene reference, and we'll go ahead and pass in our audio asset keys in title. Then we'll go ahead and get rid of this code here. Oh, if we jump back to our audio utils, let's go ahead and fix our imports. So these need to have .js. We'll go ahead and save. Oh, and then we need a reference. This is no longer this. This will actually be our scene that we pass in. All right, so if we go ahead and save, we should be able to test our changes. When our scene first starts, we should see an empty array being logged to our console. And that makes sense because we're not actually playing any audio when we run this code here. But if we go into our options scene, and let's go ahead and come back to our title scene, we'll see right away now our array has one object in it. And if we just go ahead and do this a few more times, what we should see is our array would start to grow as we add more objects to it. And so what we can actually do is with this information, now that we know which audio game objects are actually playing, we can go ahead and check to see what one's actually playing. And if it matches the audio object that we want to play, we can go ahead and just return early and not actually run this code here. That way we don't create multiple instances. What we can also do is we can use this to go ahead and stop our other audio objects that are playing and only play the one that we want to play. And so this will be helpful when we want to transition from our title scene to our world scene, because we'll want to stop our title background music and start our world scene background music. All right, so now go ahead and implement that functionality. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to loop through our existing sounds. And so for our existing sounds, we'll go ahead and do our for each method, and we'll go ahead and have our sound. And so in our function, what we want to do is check to see if our sound.key is equal to that audio key that we passed in, so our audio asset key. And if it is, then we know that our music's already playing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make a variable to keep track of this. So we'll do music already playing, and we're going to set equal to false. And so if these are equal, now we know our background music's already playing. So we can go ahead and set this to true. And so what we'll want to do is if that audio game object is the background music that we want to play, we'll go ahead and return so we don't do any other logic. If that key doesn't match our existing key, we'll want to go ahead and call the stop method on our sound game object. And what this is going to do, it's going to stop that game object and then go ahead and clean it up from our sound manager. And so this is going to allow us to make sure we're only playing one background sound game object at a time in our game. So then what we can do is after we finish looping through all of our game objects, if our music is not already playing, then and only then do we want to go ahead and call our play method on our sound manager to go ahead and play our game object. So then what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to go ahead and console back out log our existing sounds so we can just validate our logic. And so when our scene first starts, we have an empty array. If we go into our options scene, let's go ahead and close. We'll come back to our title scene. All right, so if we go and inspect our array, we'll see we have one game object and it's our title audio game object. So now if we go into options, let's go ahead and close one more time. What we should see is our array, we still only have one game object instance for our title audio game object. Perfect. All right, so now that we have our background music working in our title scene, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and update our battle scene, our world scene, to also go ahead and play background music. And so what we'll do is let's jump over to our world scene first. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this block of code here. We'll come into our world scene. Let's come to the bottom of our create method. And after we set everything up in our scene, we'll go ahead and start our audio. And so we'll just go ahead and paste this here. Let's go ahead and import our missing imports. And so instead of playing title, we want to go ahead and play main for our world scene. And if we go ahead and copy this, let's jump over to our battle scene. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing at the bottom of our create method. And so let's go ahead and update our imports. And then we want to go ahead and start our battle background music. All right, and so after we update our battle scene, we should now be able to test all of our changes over in our browser. So let's go ahead and start a brand new game. And what we should see is once our world scene starts, we should have one audio game object in our array, and it should be our title scene because we haven't cleaned it up yet. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go to our audio utils, and I'm just going to copy this block of code here. We're going to come down below our if statement, and I'm just going to do an extra copy of this. We'll do a console log. Just so we can verify all of our logic. And so now when our scene refreshes, we should be on our title scene. We see we go from an empty array to an array with one game object, and this has our title audio game object. And now if we go ahead and go into new game, what should happen is when our scene starts, we will have one game object. It should be our title. Perfect. And after our code runs, now we should have an audio game object that has our main asset key playing. All right, and if we want to do some additional testing, if we jump over to our monster party scene, and we come back to our title scene, nothing should change, our audio should still be playing. Likewise, if we go into our bag and everything like that. So now if we go ahead and come up to where we expect to encounter a monster, let's walk through our grass, see if we can trigger a battle. All right, and so once the battle starts, we should go ahead and transition. So when our audio kicks off, we should see our main audio game object playing. And then after our code runs, we should now hear our background music for our battle scene. And now we see our key is of battle. Perfect. All right, so I'm just going to clean up some code here. Let's get rid of this, and let's get rid of our console log that was up here in our audio utils. All right, with that, that brings this video to an end. In our next video, we're going to continue working on adding in audio support to our game. And we're going to focus on adding in sound effects to our game. And we're going to focus on our battle scene by adding in attack sound effects and a flee effect. And then we'll also update our world scene to go ahead and handle when our player walks in the grass. And then finally, we'll wrap up by connecting our audio manager to our settings. And so we can adjust our volume and disable our audio based on those settings. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to complete source code for this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.